Imagine living in a civilization so powerful it controlled half the known world. Now imagine that same civilization was built on brutality, fear, and human suffering. Because the Roman Empire wasn't just great, it was terrifying. We're often taught to marvel at the white marble statues, the grand aqueducts, and the sophisticated laws that shaped the Western world. We see Rome as the pinnacle of ancient logic and beauty. But beneath the polished stone lies a far more sinister truth that history books rarely mention. The glittering surface was a mask for a society driven by extreme violence and systemic exploitation. From the crowded, collapsing tenements of the Subura to the marble heights of the Palatine Hill, life for the average person was a constant nightmare of survival. This wasn't just a powerful empire, it was a complex machine that chewed through millions of lives just to maintain its aesthetic of grandeur. Today, we peel back the thick layers of romanticized propaganda to see the Roman Empire as it truly was, a dark, unforgiving force that relied on the constant spilling of blood and the suppression of the human spirit to maintain its hold on history. Rome was a monster dressed in fine marble, and its legacy is far darker than the common tale suggests. Prepare to look at the foundations of civilization with a different perspective as we uncover the secrets they didn't want you to find.
Enter the Colosseum, the grand stage where Rome showed its true face. To the Romans, it was the height of entertainment, but to history, it stands as a monument to state-sponsored slaughter. The phrase bread and circuses refers to the government's strategy of providing free grain and violent spectacle to distract a volatile and hungry population. This wasn't just a sport, it was the mechanics of blood. In these arenas, thousands of exotic animals were hunted to extinction in a single day, often just to demonstrate Roman reach. Men, forced into slavery, were trained as gladiators to kill one another for the deafening roar of the crowds. But the cruelty went deeper than just professional combat. The arena was also a place of public execution, where the condemned were torn apart by starved beasts or forced to reenact myths that ended in their actual deaths. This constant exposure to extreme, visceral violence served a very specific political purpose. It desensitized the citizens, making them more accepting of the brutal expansion and internal purges the state required for survival. The arena was a laboratory of fear, ensuring that the masses were either entertained by death or terrified of becoming the next victim. It was a place where human empathy was systematically destroyed in the name of imperial stability, turning every citizen into a witness and accomplice.
Every road, every monument, and every luxury enjoyed by the Roman elite was paid for in human bone. Rome was an industrialized engine of slavery, fueled by a constant stream of human suffering. At its peak, nearly one-third of the population of Italy was enslaved, and they were considered nothing more than speaking tools. These were not just servants in wealthy houses, they were the disposable labor that kept the gears of the empire turning day and night. The most horrific conditions were found in the silver mines of Spain and the quarries of Egypt. Deep underground, thousands of men and children worked in narrow, toxic tunnels, often chained together until they dropped dead from exhaustion or chemical poisoning. Life expectancy in these mines was often measured in mere months. On the massive farming estates, laborers were treated worse than the livestock, often kept in underground prisons known as ergastula during the night to prevent escape. The Roman economy did not just use slaves, it depended on a constant influx of fresh bodies captured in endless wars. When the supply of conquered people eventually slowed, the empire faced immediate collapse. Rome's brilliance was a literal fuel, and human suffering was the oil that kept its complex gears moving. They didn't build an empire of law,
They built a global prison house where millions of people were broken and discarded so a tiny elite could enjoy grapes and philosophy. We must remember that the statues we admire today were carved by hands that were often chained, and the roads we walk on are paved over the graves of the forgotten people who were forced to build them. If life at the bottom was a struggle for basic survival, life at the top was a toxic game of betrayal and shadow. The halls of the Roman palaces were filled with a different kind of darkness, total political corruption. The concept of the rule of law often evaporated entirely when power was at stake. Bribery was the common language of the Senate, and the emperor's favor was bought and sold by those who could afford the highest price. Corruption reached such absurd levels that positions of power, including the imperial throne itself, were once literally auctioned off by the Praetorian Guard to the highest bidder in a public display of greed. Fear dominated the lives of the elite as much as the poor. To be a senator or an emperor was to live with a target on your back every single second. Poisoning was a frequent and accepted tool for career advancement, leading some rulers to take small doses of toxins daily just to build an immunity against their own family. Assassinations were not anomalies, they were a legitimate method of succession. Think of emperors like Caligula or Nero, whose reigns were defined by absolute depravity and the execution of anyone perceived as a threat. Families turned against each other with terrifying ease, and fathers executed their own sons to maintain their grip on wealth. This created an environment of perpetual paranoia where trust was non-existent. The state was not led by public servants, but by warlords and narcissists who viewed the treasury as their private bank and the citizens as disposable playthings in their personal drama of power. The famous Pax Romana, or Roman peace, is often described in schools as a period of unprecedented stability and prosperity. But for those living outside the Italian peninsula, this peace was nothing more than the shadow of the Roman legion's blade. When the legions arrived on your borders, they didn't bring civilization through diplomacy. They brought it through total subjugation and psychological warfare. The Roman strategy for peace was the total destruction of any resistance. In the famous words of a Caledonian chieftain, as recorded by the historian Tacitus, the Romans create a wasteland and call it peace. Entire cities were leveled, populations were decimated or sold into the slave trade, and local cultures were methodically erased to make room for Roman administration. Resistance was met with crucifixion, a slow and agonizing method of public execution designed to humiliate the victim and terrify the onlookers for miles. This was not a peacekeeping force in the modern sense. It was an occupying army that enforced the emperor's will through physical terror. Every province was a conquered land, held down by the weight of Roman iron and the threat of systemic mass murder. The glory of the legions was written in the blood of those who dared to want their own freedom. How did we come to view this empire as the noble ancestor of modern society? The answer lies in the power of the Great Deception. Rome was a master of propaganda, controlling the narrative through literature, coins, and monumental architecture long after the fires went out. They told the story of their own glory while systematically burying the accounts of their victims. In the centuries following the empire's collapse, Western thinkers looked back on Rome with a false sense of nostalgia, seeking to validate their own imperial ambitions by modeling themselves after the Caesars. We chose to see the laws and the marble, while intentionally looking away from the screams in the arena and the suffering in the deep mines. But to truly understand history, we must acknowledge the darkness that balanced the light. The truth about Rome is that it was a civilization built on the extreme.
It was both a triumph of engineering and a catastrophe of human rights. As we begin this full series on the hidden history of the Roman world, we must remember that behind every great empire lies a truth that they tried to hide. History is not just what happened, but what survived the censors. It is time to listen to the voices of the millions who lived under the Roman shadow and recognize that the greatness of an empire is often measured by the silence of its victims. This is only the beginning of our journey into the shadows of the past.